By the time this series is over, some will say I'm guilty of a crime, and others will want to kill me. So let's go. Adam Darski, better known as Nergal, is a Polish musician and the singer and guitarist of the black metal band Behemoth. You might have heard of Nergal recently because he is facing criminal charges in Poland for the crime of blasphemy. That's right, blasphemy. You don't need to look at your calendar or check if there is a DeLorean parked outside. It is still 2021. It is just that Poland still considers blasphemy to be a crime. Now, this is where I'm supposed to tell you that this is the consequence of Poland's theocratic far-right politicians and that they, together with Hungary, are acting in a way that embarrasses the rest of the European community. And we'll get to that. But what if I tell you that what Poland is doing is not as unique as you might think and that there are actually many countries that punish blasphemy? And yes, this mostly happens in theocratic Middle Eastern governments, but it is also becoming increasingly common in supposedly secular nations where it has taken a very insidious form. You need to care about this because our right to say what we want, to express ourselves freely, and even the secular state itself are under threat. And we don't need to guess whether this would be a good or a bad thing. We already know what happens when the state allows or encourages the punishment of blasphemy, heresy, or apostasy. People are silenced, then persecuted, and eventually killed. It's a process that always plays out the same way. Before we begin, let me make one thing clear. This isn't an anti-religious, pro-atheism video. Even if you're a Muslim, a Jew, or a Christian, you should still care about blasphemy laws and firmly oppose them. Because this isn't about whether or not God exists. It's about our right to speak freely, yours and mine. It's about making sure that no philosophy or ideology, atheism included, can be forced on the rest of us. It's about your right to openly and freely practice your religion, whatever that religion might be, and the right of the rest of us to be free from your religion. The state shouldn't have a say on this. It's our individual right to make a choice about what to believe and what to say. Now, obviously, I am not going to pretend that seeing your beliefs mocked is easy for religious people because obviously it isn't. But the freedom to criticize and mock every idea is worth that price. Because the alternative to having that right is not a more tolerant and respectful society, but a society with less freedom. A society where the state, acting as a defender of the faith, gets to define official truths and dogmas and force everyone to respect them. And even if you like that idea because you think that your particular faith is the correct one and you like the people in power, don't fool yourself into thinking that this will never be used against you. Experience teaches us that the most likely targets of blasphemy prosecutions will not be atheists or Satanists, but instead members of your own religion. Finally, a word of warning. I've made it a point not to censor any of the blasphemous material that we will use in this series. What this means is that some of the things you'll see will probably offend you. So this is your one and only warning. If you think you can't possibly tolerate offense or seeing things that go against your beliefs, this is the time to stop watching. But honestly, I hope you won't, because maybe this will be an opportunity to look at this topic from a different perspective and listen to what has happened to victims of these laws. And even if that doesn't work, you probably think I'm going to hell anyway, so it ends up being a win-win situation for you. What is blasphemy? To put it simply, blasphemy is an insult against religion or against religious figures. Of course, you never really know what anybody might find is insulting against their religion or against their beliefs, so it's impossible to say with any certainty what is or isn't blasphemous until somebody takes offense. It really is that malleable of a concept, and countries that punish blasphemy have kept that malleability as a feature of their law. They often refer to it as offending religious feelings, a very wide concept that allows the state to punish basically anything. Article 298 of the Pakistani Criminal Code, for example, punishes anybody who does anything that hurts the religious feelings of somebody else. Something similar appears in Article 196 of the Polish Criminal Code, which also punishes those who offend the religious feelings of others. And punishments for these offenses against religious feelings can be harsh. In Poland, the punishment is up to 2 years in prison. 1 year in the case of Pakistan, unless you're blaspheming against Mohammed, because in that case, the punishment is death. And these are not exceptions to insane penalties for blasphemy. Up until last year, the punishment in Sudan was 40 lashes, although now it went down to 6 months in prison. In Turkey, it's a year in prison. In Russia, it's 1 year of hard labor. In Brunei, a country with less than 500,000 inhabitants, the punishments for blasphemy include stoning, amputations, and even death.
Brunei has introduced strict new Islamic laws. The new Islamic criminal laws that were introduced on Wednesday include harsh anti-LGBT measures that make gay sex punishable by stoning to death. Offences such as adultery, rape, sodomy, robbery and insult or defamation of Prophet Muhammad will also carry the maximum penalty of death. Despite international condemnation, Brunei has doubled down. A statement by the Prime Minister's office saying that the law only deters acts that are against the teachings of Islam.
And that's not mentioning the fact that in many parts of the world, the mere accusation of blasphemy can be enough to get you harassed, beaten, or even killed. Something that has allowed many people to use these accusations to settle personal scores.
Isn't one of the reasons you don't have the debate anymore is that even if you thought it was a terrible law, you couldn't say that to me because people who criticize these laws in your country get killed.
These laws are not terrible. The problem is with the execution of the laws, with the procedure. You have to understand Pakistan is made on the basis of religion.
A majority of blasphemy cases are based on false accusations stemming from property issues or other personal or family vendettas rather than genuine instances of blasphemy. That's what your Supreme Court said.
That's unfortunately right. These sort of issues have been found by the Supreme Court. That's why we say that there's a room for improvement.
All in all, 84 countries have some form of blasphemy law in their books. That's 43% of all UN members. And while there are many countries that don't actually enforce the ridiculous laws protecting religious feelings, many others still do. And let's be clear on this. These rules are always illegitimate because they elevate religion, or at least their respective majority religion, above everything else at the expense of our individual rights. They allow the state to actively participate in matters of faith, shielding religion from the kind of criticism that we allow for basically anything else. If you're a committed humanitarian, there is nothing you can do if someone says the Universal Declaration of Human Rights is garbage or it was written by some stoner somewhere. But in countries where blasphemy is punished, saying that about a holy book can actually get you in very serious trouble. This idea of stoners as authors of holy books is not just a random example that I just came up with. In 2010, Doda, a Polish pop singer, was convicted precisely for saying that the Bible sounded like it was written by people under the influence of drugs.
Ciężko wierzyć w coś, co spisał po prostu jakiś tam, wiesz, naprute winem i paląc po prostu jakieś, nie wiadomo, jakieś zioła.
Imagine that, a criminal conviction for saying that a book about a magical burning bush, a talking snake, and a virgin birth sounded like something you would write when you are hallucinating.
Wybacz, ale nie mam komu powiedzieć o tym, co mnie tak boli i co przeraża. Broń mnie. Broń mnie, Ojcze Duchowny.
If you think the Bible is a holy book, maybe you'd want me to be punished for saying that, but would you be willing to extend that same right to other religions? Should people be prosecuted for criticizing the Quran? Or what about Scientology? Should the creators of South Park face criminal charges for mocking their beliefs? Or for making an entire musical with jokes about Mormonism?
And I believe that ancient Jews built boats and sailed to America. I am a Mormon, and a Mormon just me.
You're probably thinking, that's different. But is it? Your faith is just as real as anybody else's faith, so it doesn't really make sense to say that offenses against major religions, or your religion, are somehow more important than offenses against minority religions. But in practice, that's what happens. And this allows the state to use these laws to, first, avoid being held responsible for their actions, and second, to marginalize entire sections of the community. Now, apologists for blasphemy laws will normally offer three justifications for them. First, that religion makes society better, so that blasphemy laws are there to defend it. Second, that religious feelings are somehow special and must be protected. And finally, that blasphemy laws ensure social harmony. The first argument, the idea that we need blasphemy laws because religion is a necessary building block for a healthy society, is based on the assumption that religion is where we get our concepts of right and wrong. It's basically an argument in favor of religion, suggesting that we need blasphemy laws, and more importantly, religion itself, in order to have a moral society.
I hate atheists because atheists don't care if somebody fornicates in the middle of the street. They don't care if their women go bouncing around on TV topless. It makes no difference to them. They don't believe in anything. If you don't believe in a set rule and you believe that a constitution can change and you can amend the rules as they go along and you don't believe in God's rule, then what law do you have? You just have man-made laws.
If there is no God and there is no lawgiver, why does it matter what I do? Why is rape wrong? Why is paedophilia wrong? Why are any of these things wrong if there is no lawgiver?
Now, there is something very offensive about this argument. If you're a religious person, I am sure that the reason why you don't rape and steal and murder is not that you're afraid of God. There is something else that makes you do that, something that is independent of your religion and which we owe to our evolution as social animals.
Morality is a lot older than religion. Humans have an innate moral sense, or a range of moral senses that you can think of as sophisticated versions of the kind of social instincts you see in chimps and other social species.
Plus, if we're honest, religion often plays a role in allowing people to do horrible things. There are many ways in which the Quran and the Bible have allowed terrorists and murderers to justify what they do. Faith is the common denominator between every bomber of an abortion clinic and every Taliban leader. It's what lets them say, I can do what I do because that is what God wants me to do.
I believe that God, he gave his life for our sins. I believe in God. And as long as I've got God on my side, I'm all right.
This doesn't mean that religion is bad for you. Many people find that religion actually makes them better human beings, and that's absolutely fine. The point is that you don't need religion to be a good and moral person, and no country needs to protect religious feelings in order to protect society. The second argument, the idea that religious feelings are special and must be protected at all costs, is based on a lie that nobody actually believes. In practice, what we see is that nobody really cares about other people's religious feelings. They only want their feelings protected at the expense of everybody else. That is why the same sections of the far right in Poland that want to jail those who blaspheme against Christianity are happy to blaspheme against Islam. Or why the same Islamic groups that complain about cartoons of Mohammed are the same that publish horribly anti-Semitic cartoons. They don't care about anybody else's feelings, they just want to see others silenced. Finally, the idea that blasphemy laws are necessary to ensure social harmony between different religious groups is simply false. In fact, research shows that blasphemy laws actually make sectarian violence worse, allow the state to discriminate against religious minorities and other types of minorities, and lead to widespread abuse. So with all of this in mind, how is it that blasphemy laws ever got to exist? And more to the point, why are they still a thing? Well, I'm gonna let you in a little secret. At the end of the day, blasphemy laws are not really there to protect religion, let alone God. They're there to protect power and to maintain the status quo. And this is because through the use of blasphemy laws, authorities can exploit the idea of religious feelings to strengthen their grip on power. They appoint themselves as guardians of the faith, holy warriors whose mission is to protect belief, and they use this power to attack those who oppose them. Think about the case of William Tyndale, an English Protestant who in 1536 was strangled and then had his body burned for the heresy of publishing the Bible in English. The Catholic Church persecuted him and many others like him, not because he wasn't a believer, but because he challenged the church's power and, most importantly, their business model. The church didn't want people thinking that they could access the Word of God without going through them first.
Religion takes in billions of dollars, they pay no taxes, and they always need a little more. Now, you talk about a good bullshit story. Holy shit.
This is the reason why books by rationalists like Spinoza or Voltaire have been targeted as blasphemous. They represented a challenge to the narrative put forward by those in power. And if the state and the church wanted to demand absolute obedience, they simply were not going to tolerate people questioning the legitimacy of that power. This is why, for example, in the late 18th century, hundreds of English booksellers were prosecuted for blasphemous libel for carrying Thomas Paine's The Age of Reason. This was a book that openly called religion into question, something that was completely unacceptable in places where the state claimed a divine right to demand absolute obedience.
I do not believe in the creed possessed by the Jewish Church, by the Roman Church, by the Greek Church, by the Turkish Church, by the Protestant Church, nor by any church that I know of. My own mind is my own church. All national institutions of churches, whether Jewish, Christian, or Turkish, appear to me no other than human inventions set up to terrify and enslave mankind and monopolize power and profit.
And this use of blasphemy laws to attack dissenters or minorities is not an anomaly. In the first part of the 20th century, for example, blasphemy laws were used in many parts of the world as a cover for combating the growth of socialism, anarchism, and anti-imperialism. In Germany, in the 1920s, George Grosz, a German artist and pacifist, was charged with blasphemy for his anti-war illustrations and for his criticism of the role of the church in Germany's militarism. His drawings, The Outpouring of the Holy Spirit, showing a priest preaching cannons and bullets, and The Authorities, portraying the church as a militaristic organization that promoted the war, got him a lot of negative attention from those in power. But it was his 1928 drawing of Keep Your Mouth Shut and Do Your Duty, portraying a crucified Christ wearing military boots and a gas mask, that actually got him charged with blasphemy.
Grosz painted it after the First World War, which saw the first large-scale use of chemical weapons. His contemporary Otto Dix had fought on the front and could not forget the horrors of the trenches. He showed them with unflinching realism. A few years later, George Grosz used this motif for his Christ with a gas mask. Widely viewed as a provocation, it sparked the start of the modern-day blasphemy debate.
Although after 2 appeals, Grosz was eventually acquitted of the charges, the rise in militarism as well as the rise of the Nazi Party forced him to leave the country. And that was probably a very good idea, since the Nazis would later accuse him of blasphemy as they exhibited his work as part of their campaign against degenerate art. Now, obviously not every target of a blasphemy prosecution has necessarily been a likable character, nor have their works been as good or meaningful as those of Thomas Paine or George Grosz. But what we have to focus on is not whether we like the people or their works, but instead on whether we want the state to play favorites in the battle of ideas. Because we know from painful experience that what ends up happening is that the state uses these laws to marginalize minorities or to eliminate dissent. Take the case of what was the last prosecution for blasphemy in England, and no, we don't need to go back hundreds of years for this one. It happened in 1977, when the publishers of the magazine Gay News were charged with blasphemy for the publication of the poem The Love That Dares to Speak Its Name.
It was published in Gay News issue 96 in June last year. As both poem and illustration have been found blasphemous in a court of law, we are not free to show them. They describe sexual acts between the centurion at the crucifixion and the dead body of Christ. The author of the poem was James Kirkup, a professor of literature who lives in Japan. He has published several volumes of verse. He was not on trial. It was the publication that offended.
This poem is very explicit in its description of sex involving Jesus Christ, and it was meant to symbolize the struggles of a Christian homosexual coming to terms with his identity. Now, remember, it doesn't matter if you like the poem or not, or if you think it's good art. The question is whether something like this should be banned because it offends the religious feelings of other people. Mary Whitehouse certainly thought so. She was the Christian conservative activist who, despite not being a reader of Gay News or a homosexual herself, decided to file charges against his publication for the crime of blasphemy.
I read that. I don't recollect that there was anybody in the office. I think I possibly opened my post before anybody came in. I was entirely alone when I saw that and read it. And I just felt in my heart, I could not let that happen. I don't mean I wanted to stop that thing being printed. It was being printed. But the challenge to me was this. If I did nothing about that, I was then part and identified myself with the people who turned their back on Christ, who didn't want to know Christ at the time of his crucifixion.
This is a recurrent theme in a lot of the cases involving the offense of religious feeling. People actively exposing themselves to things that they know will offend them, just so that they can then complain about how offended they feel.
When Dr. Samuel Johnson had finished his great lexicography, the first real English dictionary, he was visited by various delegations of people to congratulate him, including a delegation of London's respectable womanhood who came to his parlour in Fleet Street and said, "Doctor, we congratulate you on your decision to exclude all indecent words from your dictionary." And he said, "Ladies, I congratulate you on your persistence in looking them up." If people are determined to be offended, if they will climb up on the ladder, balancing it precariously on their own toilet system, to be upset by what they see through the neighbour's bathroom window, there's nothing you can do about that.
And in this case, it worked. The magazine and the publisher were sentenced to a fine and were forced to pay the legal, or at least part of Mary Whitehouse's legal fees. She would later go on to try to repeat this blasphemy tactic against such massive threats to humanity as Monty Python's Life of Brian, although that time she was not successful.
You have been found guilty by the elders of the town of uttering the name of our Lord, and so as a blasphemer, you are to be stoned to death.
Look, I'd had a lovely supper, and all I said to my wife was that piece of halibut was good enough for Jehovah.
Blasphemy! He said it again!
Nowadays, we can see a replay of this in Poland, where the Christian right government has used these laws to go against LGBT activists and to stay unopposed when pushing its authoritarian and openly homophobic ideology.
Wiecie, czego oni się boją? Tego się boją! Tego się boją! Marksiści, lewacy! Tego się boją! Patrzcie! Zwyciężymy jeszcze raz! Ave! Ave! Chrystus Rex!
Among the crowd are several politicians, including a prominent Law and Justice MP, Dominik Tarczynski.
Jestem dlatego, że kocham Polskę, kocham swoją rodzinę, chcę, aby była bezpieczna, aby się rozwijała, aby była chrześcijańska.
This is what happened to Joanna Gzira Izkandar, Anna Prus, and Elżbieta Podlesna, all of whom were charged with blasphemy for adding the rainbow colors to this image of the Virgin Mary. This is the Black Madonna of Częstochowa, an icon that the Polish Catholic Church considers holy.
Chcemy kochać, chcemy mieć prawo do swoich opinii i do swojego stylu życia.
Elżbieta Podlesna is a social activist. She recently made the headlines after being detained for putting up pro-LGBT posters. They portray the Black Madonna, Poland's most revered religious icon, but with a rainbow halo. Offending religious feeling is a crime in Poland. She faces 2 years in prison, but says her actions were necessary.
LGBT people are now in danger in Poland because they are treated as a scapegoat.
Before we get into this story, there are a couple of things that you need to know about Poland. First, despite their communist past, they remain a very Christian country. Because of this, the Catholic Church, the largest religion in the country, has a huge influence in policymaking. Second, the current government of Poland, under the Law and Justice Party, better known as PiS, as well as the Polish right-wing populist movement, have crafted the message that Polish identity, Catholicism very much included, is under threat by what they call LGBT ideology.
Czerwona zaraza już po naszej ziemi na szczęście nie chodzi. Co wcale nie znaczy, że nie ma nowej, która chce opanować nasze dusze, nasze serca i umysły. Nie marksistowska, bolszewicka, ale zrodzona z tego samego ducha, neomarksistowska. Nie czerwona, ale tęczowa.
The powerful leader of the ruling Law and Justice Party, Jarosław Kaczyński, has called the LGBT movement a threat to the Polish state. His party is closely connected to the Polish Catholic Church, which sees homosexuality as a sin. Although opinion polls suggest that Poles are generally tolerant towards LGBT issues, Many cultural conservatives believe that homosexuality should not be visible.
Now, before you start typing comments about some tabloid-friendly gender issue like pronouns, the debate about trans women in sports, or some weirdly sexual TikTok trend, I think it's important to note that the Polish government is not part of that debate at all. In fact, what the Polish Christian right wing is doing is just to attack sexual minorities by rehashing some of the same bigoted attacks that homosexuals have encountered throughout history. For starters, they speak about LGBT ideology, as if a person's sexuality was a matter of choice, as if in a country where homosexuals get beaten up on the streets for holding hands, there were a lot of teenage boys just jumping at the chance to get their teeth knocked out, or girls happy to live under the constant threat of corrective rape. Obviously, it's nonsense. It is just a fundamentalist religious understanding of homosexuality that sees homosexuals as sinners and which seeks to punish them for their sin. And as if this wasn't bad enough, the attacks against the LGBT community has equated them to pedophiles. Under the excuse of protecting the children, some areas of Poland have even declared themselves LGBT-free zones. It is in this context that those three activists created the Rainbow Madonna. It doesn't matter what you think about the debate surrounding LGBT issues. You cannot deny that the Rainbow Madonna was, first and foremost, a political statement, something made to call attention to their cause through the juxtaposition of a sacred symbol of Polish Christianity on the one hand with the symbol of the gay community on the other. If nothing else, it was a message worth discussing. But that didn't matter. Remember, under Article 196 of the Polish Criminal Code, to offend the religious feelings of someone else is a crime. It doesn't matter if what you have to say is politically important. If you offend the religious feelings of others, you can be charged with a crime. Maybe you'll pay a fine, or if things go really wrong, you'll go to prison for a couple of years. Or you'll get lucky and you'll get acquitted. In fact, that is what happened to those activists. After going through the process for about a year, they were finally acquitted. Now, some of you might be thinking, the system worked, they were acquitted, so why is this guy even talking about the case? Well, you're right, they were acquitted, but this is where we need to talk about the concept of chilling effects. In essence, chilling effects refers to situations where someone decides to stop speaking not because it's necessarily forbidden to speak, but because they've been intimidated into silence. Imagine that every time you said something, you risk enormous consequences for doing it. In fact, imagine that you say something that is really offensive against my religious feelings. So I call the cops. You get arrested, they take you to the police station, they book you, they keep you in a holding cell for a few hours and parade you in front of the press. Your name gets mentioned in the media all over the country, and now a lot of other people are also very angry and very offended at you. And so you and your family start getting harassed. Journalists camp outside of your house, and your mother is shown crying on TV as reporters shove cameras under her face, demanding to know what she thinks about her criminal child. But you go to trial, and after losing a year of your life and probably a boatload of money to pay lawyers, you get acquitted. Would you really see your situation as a victory? Do you think that you would come off on top? And most importantly, would you like to try again? Don't you think that seeing you go through that calvary will also make other people think twice before they say anything that could potentially offend someone else's religious feelings? The price of speaking up becomes too high. For those pushing for blasphemy laws, the conviction is just a nice thing to have. It's the cherry on top of this travesty. The process is the punishment. It's what teaches people to stay in line. And this isn't hypothetical. This is exactly what happened to Dorota Nieznalska over her work Pasha. Back in 2010, after an exhibit of her work in Gdansk was already finished, a gang of far-right thugs who had seen Dorota's work in a conservative propaganda program barged into the gallery and demanded to see this artwork. When their demands were not met, they contacted the police and reported Dorota for the crime of offending their religious feeling. This started what ended up being an almost decade-long nightmare for Dorota. She was first found guilty of blasphemy in 2003 in a decision in which the court openly demonstrated its bias in favor of the Catholic Church. It didn't matter whether the victims of this offense had seen the entire piece or whether they saw it directly or whether they saw it on TV. Dorota had to be punished because this display of the Christian cross was an unforgivable sin in and of itself. The court said that art should not insult the feelings of other persons, since being an artist wasn't an excuse to engage in what the court referred to as a gross violation of the rights of others. And for this, she was sentenced to community service and to some other restrictions of her liberty. This was applauded by the conservative Polish media, which labeled Dorota as a useless parasite that wasted taxpayers' money and who had greatly profited from the attention of the trial. In fact, as the court itself conceded, the reason for Dorota's punishment was to somehow compensate for the supposed fame and fortune that the case had given her. But the problem is that this was all based on a lie. It was pure right-wing propaganda. The case actually destroyed Dorota financially as she lost her ability to make a living. She was quietly replaced from her job as an art teacher, and galleries were afraid of even showing her work. Because of the trial, she was also prevented from traveling abroad, so she also couldn't try and make it as an artist elsewhere. For a while, she was working at a warehouse and as a cleaner, since those were the only jobs that she was able to get. And yes, of course, nobody has a right to make a living as an artist if people don't want to buy their work. But in the case of Dorota, the reason why she found herself in that situation was the fear instilled in other people by the spectacle of her punishment. That is a chilling effect. Dorota appealed her conviction, there was a new trial, and she was acquitted in 2009. But then the Polish prosecutor appealed that decision, and it wasn't until 2010 that Dorota's acquittal was final. All of this for an art exhibit that would have otherwise flown completely under the radar of most people. And do you know how much something like this actually costs? It costs a lot. In fact, let's get back to where we started, to Nergal, to Adam Darski. Nergal has spent more than 20,000 euros defending himself from the many speech crimes that the Polish prosecutors have accused him with. The first prosecution was the result of a 2007 concert in Gdansk, where Adam ripped up a Bible. Kind of like this.
They call this book holy. I dare not to agree. To me, it's the source of all hypocrisy and the worst evil that men do to each other. Burn it! Prison it!
Now, you might be asking whose religious feelings were hurt as a result of this performance. After all, this happened inside of a concert in a closed venue at a black metal show. If you're not familiar with that genre, black metal is a traditionally anti-Christian genre of heavy metal. So being offended at a black metal show because someone rips up a Bible is like being offended at a strip club because of all the nudity. It's really a part of the experience that people are paying for.
Blast beat babes tearing up scorched earth, summoning demons in matching battery shirts. I want a patch, let's buy some merch. Okay, sounds good, but first let's burn the church. Totally brutal.
Plus, you can't even claim that a stunt like this is shocking or unexpected, especially for heavy metal. I mean, Marilyn Manson has been doing it since the 90s, so it is not exactly an unheard of shtick, even among household names. So who were those offended? Who were the offended victims? How did they end up in a show like this? Well, you won't be surprised to know that the people who filed the complaint, the people who were first offended by Nergal's actions, they were not even present at the concert. They were parliamentarians of PiS, this Law and Justice Party, this authoritarian right-wing Christian party. And for ripping up this book, Nergal was tried twice, ended up twice before the Supreme Court, and was finally acquitted in 2015. That is 8 years and 2 trials at great expense, not just for Nergal, but also for Polish taxpayers. And for what? Ripping up a book in front of people who paid to see him rip up a book? Expressing his view of the Catholic Church and of religion in general? 8 years? Are we being serious? The entire Second World War lasted less than that. And that wasn't the end. Because, you see, to his credit, Nergal has not been silenced by these authoritarians. And even as the Law and Justice Party has consolidated its power and moved Poland in this very dangerous direction, Nergal has remained a loud dissenting voice, using his social media to bring attention to what is happening in the country. Now, I'll be the first one to admit that Nergal's social media is bizarre and a little bit cringy. He's basically an influencer with heavy metal shirts. In fact, didn't we have something for this? But that's not all. In between his many thirsty photos and videos, he often posts about this creeping wave of authoritarianism affecting Poland, as well as his own criticism of religion in general and the Catholic Church in particular. While it could be easy to dismiss this kind of things as just Nergal trying to be edgy, and there is probably an element of that, his criticisms are valid, and they are often echoed by major human rights organizations. This has brought the kind of attention that Polish authoritarians would rather avoid, because they would much rather do what they're doing in the cover of darkness. Because you see, for a while now, Poland has been moving in a dangerously authoritarian direction. Poland's judiciary is no longer considered independent, and according to every international metric, it is now largely subservient to the will of the government. Public media entities have become propaganda machines for the state, rivaling the kind of hatred and disinformation that those same public outlets were spewing when they were controlled by communist tyrants. The Polish Catholic Church has been instrumental in this move towards authoritarianism, and PiS and other far-right organizations have used religion to push their objective, reshaping Polish society in a traditional Catholic way at the expense of anybody who opposes. This isn't a figure of speech. The power of the Catholic Church intertwined with these far-right elements is even affecting basic healthcare. Sex education, for example, has become highly restricted. The state only offers optional courses where they only push Christian propaganda, speaking against masturbation, homosexuality, abortion, premarital sex, and even against the use of contraception. And let's make no mistake here, bad sex education hurts people. Things in Poland have gotten so bad on this point that under the guise of going against pedophilia, there is a law going through parliament that would make it illegal to teach sex education to people under 18. This isn't an exaggeration. The bill expressly criminalizes the public promotion and praise of minors engaging in sexual activity. This means that a sex education teacher or a doctor telling a 16-year-old that masturbation is natural or explaining birth control methods could face up to 3 years in prison.
Sex educators such as Ola Dulas and Anya Jurek will be directly affected. The two have been offering progressive sex education in schools in Poland's third largest city, Łódź, for 10 years. This could be over soon.
This law means that anyone who talks to minors about sexuality could be in danger, because any conversation could be interpreted as persuading the minors to engage in sex.
They're not the only ones affected by the law. Psychologists or doctors would be impacted too.
If this law comes into force in its current form or an even stricter version, people like us could be threatened with up to 3 years in prison. For me, personally, that means that I will no longer offer any more sex education to those under 18.
What's insane here is that the age of consent in Poland is 15, meaning that an adult could legally have sex with a 16-year-old but not tell her that she should take birth control. These Christian fundamentalists have also continued to push for more and more restrictions on abortion with the aim of outlawing it altogether. In fact, that anti-pedophilia law that I mentioned was actually drafted by Fundacja Pro, an ultra-conservative Catholic organization that, besides trying to destroy basic sex education, also seeks to outlaw all forms of abortion.
The father of three set up the foundation Pro Right to Life, a group of radical anti-abortionists. For 20 years, he has fought against anything that could endanger the Catholic nuclear family. His latest enemy is liberal sex education. He wants to outlaw the work of NGOs offering sex education in accordance with WHO standards.
These so-called NGOs send young people into our schools and claim that they are working on prevention. But in truth, they are telling the children that masturbation is okay and that sexual intercourse is fine, irrespective of age, as long as the partner agrees. That is like encouraging children to go into prostitution.
And it is in the context of this debate over women's rights that we get to Nergal's next
blasphemy charge.
Something so remarkably stupid that I just have to show it to you. And even though I'm doing it just so that you understand the kind of things where taxpayer money is being wasted, the fact that some authoritarians are bothered by this just makes it that much sweeter.
Możesz biegły się wystąpić.
The song that Nergal is singing is Marcowy Kwiatek, or March Flower, a children's song about the 8th of March, International Women's Day. Though some might think that it's an edgy and cringy video, and it is, in the context of the assault against women's rights in Poland, and the role that the church has played in that assault, it looks like an effective way to draw attention to that problem. Of course, even if it wasn't a political expression, we should still defend the right of people to express their ideas in whatever way they see fit. But the fact that it actually does express a political view shows that by attacking it, what the regime is doing is to silence criticism and dissent. It is not about protecting anybody's feelings. We know this because Nergal posted this video on his own Instagram, which even has a warning in Polish, alerting people that they might be offended by what they see there. Not that this stops anyone looking to be offended from being offended, of course. In fact, prosecutors follow Nergal, hoping to find something to be offended by and to call the cops on him. And that was not even the last time that Nergal faced prosecution. Last year, he faced new charges over another Instagram post, this time of his foot apparently stepping on a picture of Mary. Although he was recently acquitted of that charge, prosecutors, as well as a far-right Christian organization called Ordo Iuris, have already filed an appeal against it. And that's without mentioning another stupid trial where somebody wrongly thought that a t-shirt by Behemoth was desecrating the Polish national emblem. All of these prosecutions over Instagram posts are really concerning. I mean, is every website at risk? Is everyone at risk? Maybe. Because people close to the case told me that prosecutors in that sculpture case, the case where Nergal is singing, they had also wanted to charge the artist who made that sculpture. You know who that artist is? He is Tom G. Warrior, the legendary founder of Celtic Frost, Hellhammer, and importantly, not a Polish citizen, nor based in Poland. He is Swiss, and the only reason why he didn't end up getting charged or forced to testify against Nergal was because Polish authorities wouldn't be able to get Switzerland to cooperate with their medieval persecution. What does that mean for the rest of us who might do something offensive against someone's religious feelings? Will Poland try to get us extradited, or more likely, will we face arrest if we ever go to Poland? And still on the topic of metal, should black metal bands even dare go to Poland? Or should they be prepared to be arrested? And what about the performance itself? Should they play it safe and sanitize their music, their image, and their live shows, complying with whatever fascist list of demands Catholic fundamentalists want to put forward? Or what about me? What if I go to Poland? Will I get arrested for showing you Nergal's videos and photos? Or showing you this photo? Or this one? Or this one? Or this?
Here you are, baby. Fresh baked pie. Just for you. Where did you get this? I baked it. From scratch. We don't have an oven. God helped me. Joseph, please. You see how that sounds, Mary?
You see, that's what the system wants us to do. They want to keep us on our toes, double-guessing ourselves, always thinking twice before we say anything. At some point, they don't even need to prosecute anyone because people learn to keep their mouths shut. And although I've used Poland as an example of Christian fundamentalism shaping politics, they are far from being the only ones. The same kind of illiberal forces have also affected Hungary, whose dictator has also gone against sex education and regurgitated the same kind of ignorant propaganda against homosexuals. And that's without mentioning Russia, where the government has also used the Russian Orthodox Church to further consolidate power and use blasphemy prosecutions against minorities and dissidents. And even though Poland is probably the most famous case of blasphemy laws being used in Europe, they are not the only ones who keep these medieval relics in their legal system. Many European countries, including Austria, Germany, Spain, Italy, Finland, and Iceland, all have some versions of laws that protect religion from mockery and criticism. Defaming belief or insulting religious feelings can land you in prison. As long as these laws stand, we are not a free people because they muzzle us, they silence us, and they make open debate impossible. Now, before we finish, I want to speak directly to any Polish Catholic who might have made it this far. Kolego, chyba gdzieś zastanawiasz. Jaka mlez z tego godzisz? Dlaczego powinienem popierać prawo innych do obrażania mojej religii? Instead of just giving you a principled answer about why free speech is good in general, I'm going to do something a bit different. I'm going to just give you pragmatic reasons why, even if you're a Polish Catholic, you should oppose blasphemy laws. First, by supporting blasphemy laws, you are giving up your ability to openly debate your own religion and the people who run it. This is especially relevant if you care about children and want to stop pedophilia. After all, for years, the Polish Catholic Church has been complicit in the rape and torture of Polish children, moving priests around and letting them avoid prosecution and find new victims.
Oto słowo pańskie. Dobrze, zapraszam wszystkie dzieci z technicznej ustawy.
Zaraz pan na stronie księdza Lejniczaka, co pan chce od księdza Lejniczaka?
Pani co, chciałbym się go spytać po prostu, jak to jest, że ma dożywotni zakaz pracy z dziećmi, zaraz mogę pani pokazać wyrok, a jeździ po rekolekcjach.
Proszę pana, na pewno nie jeździ po rekolekcjach.
To zaraz pani pokaże.
Proszę pana, na pewno nie prowadzi rekolekcji.
Abyście wiedzieli o tym, że prowadzi? Na własną rękę jest możliwość, żeby on pojechał sobie sam gdzieś?
Na pewno nie.
Anioł został posłany, pamiętacie tę scenę z Biblii? Kiedy został posłany anioł Gabriel do Maryi i mówi do niej, kiedy ona krzątała się w tym domku swoim w Nazarecie, mówi: raduj się, Maryjo.
And Poland isn't an exception on this. In France, an independent commission recently determined that since the 1950s, over 3,000 priests and other church members have abused and raped more than 330,000 children. Similarly, in Ireland, a 2009 independent report determined that church officials had engaged in the systematic abuse, rape, and torture of tens of thousands of children all over the country. And the list goes on and on. And don't forget that all throughout these investigations, the Catholic Church and the Vatican itself have done everything in their power to stop those victims from being heard and to stop justice from being served. So if you really care about protecting children, having the ability to criticize the Catholic Church is essential. After all, many of its authorities have committed the most egregious and disgusting acts against children and have been protected by this supposedly holy institution.
Pan ksiądz wydawał się bardzo miły i sympatyczny. Na początku całego tego spotkania okazało się, że że oni się strasznie przejmują, że to już jest odsunięte.
Sami zajmą się sprawą. Pod tytułem wyciągną konsekwencje. Tylko jak my się o tym dowiemy? Jak my to, czy ja mam wpływ, mam wgląd do tego, tak?
No i co?
No i się dowiedzieliśmy, że nie.
Nie mamy żadnego wpływu.
Że nie mamy i że się o niczym nie dowiemy. I to jest ich wewnętrzna sprawa.
Jak on zrozumiał, że my nie odpuścimy i chcemy wiedzieć i zaczęliśmy napierać, że my chcemy wiedzieć, nie zgodzimy się na to, to zmienił się ten rozmowy. To już w tym momencie usłyszeliśmy, że musimy się liczyć z konsekwencjami naszych działań, ponieważ występujemy przeciwko instytucji Kościoła.
But with blasphemy laws, you don't have that freedom to criticize your own religion and the people who run it, because you are limited in your ability to criticize the Pope and the Church for their complicity in the abuse and rape of children, because after all, attacking the Catholic Church could offend someone else's religious feeling. So, what's more important to you? Getting justice for children? Protecting children from abusive pedophiles who have used the cover of your church to torture and rape? Or do you care more about protecting the institution that shielded those rapists and the religious feelings of its members? You can't have it both ways. When you give up your ability to criticize religion, or the government for that matter, you give up your right to defend yourself and to defend those who are close to you. Second, you lose any kind of moral superiority in the so-called culture wars. Do you like to bitch and moan about cancel culture and about how snowflake SJWs need trigger warnings because everything offends them? Well, blasphemy laws make you sound exactly like that. You are the one demanding a safe space free from offense to your religious feelings. You are the one asking the state to protect you from scary pictures, songs, and thirsty Instagram posts featuring a clay penis. Unless, of course, you are willing to accept that people can think differently and that they have the right to offend and criticize whatever idea you hold dear, in the same way that you should be able to do the same to their deeply held beliefs. If you are a Christian, you are obviously going to feel offended by someone stepping on a religious icon or saying something hurtful about your belief system. But how do you think gay people feel when they see Polish Catholics stepping on a rainbow flag or seeing it covered with slogans about pedophilia? For you, it doesn't mean anything, but to them, it obviously means a lot. It represents their sexual identity, which they might hold just as dearly as you hold your faith. After all, it's an identity that has often resulted in many of them being humiliated, beaten, and even massacred. And yes, to preemptively answer your question, I do believe that you should have the right to step on a rainbow flag if that's what you want to do. But I also think that people can rip up Bibles, photos of the Pope, or step on an image of Mary, because that is the price of freedom. And finally, you put other Christians at risk. Geopolitics are tricky, and countries look at each other to see what they can get away with. And countries far from Europe's borders point at what happens here to justify what they do in their own countries. Have you ever heard of how blasphemy laws are used in the Middle East? How Christians and other minority groups face persecution and murder for merely practicing their religion or expressing their views? You'd be surprised to know how the same kind of laws that are used to suppress dissent in Poland, the same laws about religious feelings, are used to suppress Christians and others in other countries. In fact, maybe it's a good idea to show you exactly how bad things can get when you allow the state to become a defender of the faith, when government and society aggressively police religious expression. And for this, we have to go to Pakistan. What? Did you think we were not going to talk about Islam?